Hey, how's it going? This is Nate English from EnglishEndurance.com, and this week one of my clients emailed me and asked about how to pace the Diablo challenge this weekend, so this is going to be a short video about that, and it should be useful to anyone who's trying to pace any kind of longer sustained hill climbing or time trial type effort, because in general the principles that would apply for the Diablo challenge would apply to any sustained climbing or time trial type effort. So this question is pretty easy if you have a lot of good data with your power and heart rate monitor, if you have those things, because if you have done a variety of different workouts for a while and you have a power meter to look at, you can just go look at your peak power curve and see what kind of power you can do for 40, 50, 60, 70 minutes. And if you're doing a time trial or a hill climb that's anywhere in that range, you can see like, oh, for an hour I've been able to do 260 watts in the last year. And you can go look at that ride or that activity and see what kind of effort that was. And if it was pretty steady pacing and you remember that it was a pretty hard effort, then you know that you can probably do around that kind of power for a sustained climb like Diablo or a time trial or something like that. The challenge is if you know that you're fitter than you were, or that you were in peak fitness and now you're a little bit less fit, then you can kind of extrapolate and guess about how much more or less power you can do. In an ideal world, you could go out and pre-ride the course and do a hard effort that isn't full gas. But if you let's say you think you can do like 280 watts up Diablo, if you went out and did it in training and you did 250 or 260 and it was hard, but you know that you could give a little bit more, then you have a pretty good handle on what you're capable of. Likewise, if you have good heart rate data, and if you know that your peak sustained heart rate for an hour, let's say, is 160 or 170, you can use that as a very useful guide while you're doing the effort and also in training. So if you go out and you do a hard effort and your average heart rate, the first several minutes, your heart rate will slowly creep up, and you want to allow time for that to happen, because if it shoots up right away, you probably were going too hard early on, because it's a long climb and it takes a little while for your heart rate to kind of catch up to the effort you're doing. But if you went out on a training ride, let's say, and your heart rate kind of climbs and then it hovers, let's say around 160, and you're going hard but you're definitely holding back, then you can probably guesstimate based on past experience, if you're paying attention to your heart rate data a lot, that maybe you can do 165 or 170 if you go out and you just do like a full gas effort up the climb on race day. And you can always assume that on race day you're probably going to be a little bit fresher, you're going to be a little bit more focused and like ready to do a really peak intense effort, so you can probably get a little bit more have a little bit higher heart rate on race day than you could in training a lot of the time. Not always, but often. In contrast, like if you went out and you went on a very hot day, your heart rate might be as high or even higher than if you go out first thing in the morning on the Diablo challenge day and maybe it's like 60 degrees outside. Those cool conditions will help keep your heart rate down, but on average on race day your heart rate will tend to be a few to several beats higher than on a normal training day. So that's pretty straightforward. The more challenging situation is if you don't have a lot of good power and heart rate data, and if you look at your peak power curve, you maybe take a look at what kind of if you look at your peak power curve, you'll see there's like little steps usually where you did like some pretty hard efforts, and then maybe you've done a hard effort for 40 minutes and you haven't done a hard effort for 50 minutes, and so you see that your power curve kind of like levels off and then it drops down a little bit more around 40 minutes. That's fine, whatever. But if you look at one of those like kind of high points on your power curve and you select it and you go analyze that ride or that activity, in that segment where you had your peak power, if it was highly variable power because it was on a fast group ride on hilly terrain and there were some descents and some periods when you weren't pedaling that hard, then you know that you can definitely do more power than that, but it's hard to say exactly how much more power. The more steady and the more hard the effort was, the more useful it is for extrapolating what you think you can do on a time trial or a hill climb. The more variable it is, and the more periods of time that you had that were very easy, or that you were totally off the gas and you were descending, let's say, the harder it is to extrapolate what you can do for a time trial, let's say. You can look at the normalized power and have that as a good estimate for what you could do for a sustained effort of that duration. Usually I don't like looking at normalized power too much because I think it's it's an estimate of what you could do in an idealized version of the effort that you actually did in the real world. But, anytime that you're extrapolating in that type of situation, there's going to be a lot of room for error. But if you did, let's say, 300 watts average on a fast group ride and it was hilly and it was pretty hard and there were not many times that you, laid off the gas and it was a long effort like that, the bigger the data set and the longer the effort, the more useful any extrapolation will be. So let's say your normalized power was 330. That would not be a terrible estimate for what you might be able to do during a sustained, steady effort. So, that could be useful. You can do the same thing for heart rate and look at what your peak 1 hour heart rate is, or somewhere around there, 40, 60, 70 minutes, and then see okay, I can average 170 for an hour during a peak effort. So you can use that as a guide for the Diablo challenge or some other similar event where it'll take you several minutes for your heart rate to slowly climb up to around that range. But then you'll want to see it hovering, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes in around that, peak heart rate. And if you're 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, and your heart rate is 175 or 180, and then your peak 1 hour heart rate was 170, then you're going too hard and you should back off a little bit. On the other hand, if you're half an hour in and your heart rate's in the low 160s and you feel like you could be going harder, then you should definitely be pushing a little bit harder, because that your heart and your body's assessment of how hard it is gives you more room to go harder, because in the past you've been able to go 170 heart rate for an hour. So I would use all those things to be useful kind of guides. And so for me, I know that I want to shoot for approximately a certain amount of power and approximately a certain heart rate. So let's say I want to go around 400 watts average up the climb, and I know that on average during a hard training ride I might average 160 heart rate, and I'll see peaks in the high 160s, but usually not peaks above 170, and I definitely won't see an average heart rate around 170. So if I'm 5 or 10 minutes in and I see my heart rate around 170, I definitely know I'm going too hard. On the other hand, if I'm 5 minutes in and my heart rate is below 160, that sounds great. If my power is about 400, it feels like solid work, but it's not hard. That's on track for the type of effort that I think I can do. So ideally, the first quarter of the way, you're doing the kind of power that you want to be doing, and it feels hard, but it's very manageable. And your heart rate is slowly climbing. 10, 15, 20 minutes in, your heart rate should stabilize around what you want your average to be, or slightly above that. And then, a third of the way, a quarter, a third, a half the way up, it should start to feel increasingly more like work, but you should feel like you have a lot in the tank that you can still keep going. And if you are shooting for, let's say for me, 400 watts, and I get halfway up and I feel like I really have a lot more that I could be giving, it makes sense that I would undershoot and then increase my intensity later on, rather than go out way too hard and then have to suffer later on. Because if I give up 20 or 30 seconds on the first half, if I have not been going as hard as I can go, I can dig in more and pick up some of that lost time. Whereas if I go out too hard, I'm more likely to lose more time later on if I overshot my pacing early on. I think the most challenging thing is if you have, no good data for what kind of power or heart rate you can do for a sustained effort for a long period of time. So if that's the case, you could look at some of your workouts. So if you have a power meter and a heart rate monitor, or one or the other, look at some of the harder workouts you've done where you did sustained, short to intermediate intervals. So if, let's say you did 4 by 10 minutes or 4 by 15 minutes, or 3 by 15 minutes. Look at the power that you've done for those efforts, and especially if the recovery period between those efforts was relatively short, or if it was taking place during a longer ride, that will be a good estimate for maybe what you could do for a peak effort for 45, 60, 75 minutes. Probably what you can do for 3 or 4 by 15 minutes would be similar to what you could do for the Diablo challenge if you totally nail being fresh and ready to go on race day. But I would use that as an upper limit. So let's say you can do 3 by 15 minutes at 250 watts, and that's a really hard but very doable workout for you, and you've done that a few times in the past. I would think, maybe in perfect conditions, you could average 250 all the way up the climb, but I might go out and shoot for 230 to 240 for the first quarter of the climb, and kind of just monitor how you're feeling, monitor what your heart rate's doing, and see if a quarter of the way up or a third of the way up or half the way up, you can keep doing that and it still feels kind of easy. Then you could just ramp up and do 250, 260 perhaps. But if you're going, a quarter of the way, a third of the way, half the way up, and keeping it in that range feels pretty challenging, just keep it rolling at that intensity. It's, again, better to kind of undershoot early on and pick up the pace later than it is to blow your wad on the first third of the climb and then suffer through the last third. If you have absolutely no data and you've never done any structured training efforts, and you don't have a good handle on what kind of power or heart rate you can do because you either don't have monitors to track those things or you just haven't been paying a lot of attention to those things, that's totally fine. They're very useful tools, and I would encourage you to pay attention to those things and make use of them. And especially nowadays, power meters are getting cheaper and cheaper, but they're still several $100s. But at the very least, you can get a heart rate monitor and a computer that would track that data for $100, $150 that would do an excellent job at enhancing the quality of your training if you care about being deliberate about your training and trying to maximize what kind of fitness you can get. But anyway, if you don't have a power meter, or you don't have a heart monitor, or you just got them but you don't really know what those numbers mean to you just yet, pay attention to how you're feeling. Know that if you pace it evenly, the first quarter of the way up, it's not going to feel that hard. The middle third of the race is going to feel pretty hard, but very doable still. And at a steady pace, the last third will just increasingly feel like you're getting closer and closer to cracking. And ideally, if you pace it perfectly, you would basically just crack at the finish line. But, if anything, cracking at the finish line or just past it is better than overdoing it and cracking 5 minutes to go and then, rolling in that last, if you paced it so that it should have taken you 5 minutes, it might take you 8 minutes if you totally blow up. But, so it should, just feel like a slowly increasing effort if you pace it evenly. And you could just think in mind, what would it take, or what does it feel like to ride hard, breathe heavily, feel like you're working, but not have your legs aching or burning, and not be riding so intensely that you lose control of your breath. Ideally, your breathing should be controlled and deep and, relatively fast, but you should be able to, let's say, utter a few words to people that you're riding with. If you can talk in complete sentences, you should be able to go harder. If you can't let out more than just 1 or 2 words at a time, you're probably closer to your limit than maybe is ideal. Very skilled high-level athletes will be at a place where they can do pretty peak efforts that are that intense, where they are just utterly focused and probably won't have much of a capacity to speak at all during a 1 hour peak effort, but they can sustain just barely feathering what their limit is. So if you look at half marathon or marathon runners, they're going really fast and they're probably right around their respiratory limit basically the whole time. And they could, utter 1 or 2 words, but they're probably so focused on doing their effort and kind of gauging their intensity that they probably won't speak at all during their effort. And the same with me. If I go out and do Diablo hard, I'll be just really paying close attention to my breathing and how my legs feel, and I'll take a look at my power meter and my heart rate monitor, the numbers that they're giving me periodically, but I will be really tuned in to how I'm feeling and try to be as close to my limit as I can be without overdoing it. And even 5 or 10 minutes in, it won't feel that hard, but I know that I really want to just stay as relaxed as possible and stay as focused as possible while I'm doing that effort, so that I don't overdo it, but also that I'm not ever losing focus and backing off of the effort, the intensity that I should be doing. But anyway, yeah, just to summarize, if you have good data, look at your 1 hour peak power, look at your 1 hour peak heart rate, use those as, guides for how intensely you could do the Diablo challenge or a similar time trial or hill climb. If you don't have good data and you look at your 1 hour peak power, your 1 hour peak heart rate, and those activities were highly variable, maybe look at the normalized power, or, assume that you can at least do that much power and maybe a little bit more depending on how variable that was. If you don't have either of those things, just look at what kind of pacing you can do for a very hard threshold type workout. So 2 or 3 or 4 efforts that are 10, 15, 20 minutes long. Whatever you can do, 3 by 20, you can probably do close to that on race day on Diablo. And I think that's about it. I don't know. I mean, I know that it's really mentally challenging to wrap your head around doing a 1 hour peak effort, but it's, you know, it's challenging for everyone. I would just have a lot of confidence that if you have a good handle on what kind of numbers you expect to see, that from, you know, looking at that data, you can have confidence that your training will allow you to do what you've done in the past and maybe a little bit more. And so have confidence that you're capable of doing that. And then just tune into your body and listen to what it's telling you on race day so that you can focus and do your best effort, and just be smart about it. Be wise. Don't get carried away and go like way too hard early on. But also don't give yourself so much slack that, you know, 3/4 of the way up, you realize that you could have been going harder the whole way. So just focus and do your best effort. And as long as you do that, you will be successful, whether you are able to set a PR or completely destroy your old PR, or maybe in the past you were a little bit fitter and you couldn't quite match whatever your previous best was. That's okay too. But as long as you do your best effort and you know you paced it well, you know that you'll have gotten the best out of your body on that day that you were capable of. So you can have confidence in that at least. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in that boat where I really hope that I can do a good effort that day, and I have a lot of nerves about it because my preparation hasn't been perfectly ideal, but hopefully it works out and I can do an effort that I'm very proud of. And if you're out there, maybe I'll see you. But yeah, that's it for this video. I'll see you later. Bye.